Welcome, everyone, to Conversations with Impact,
the podcast for educators focused on making an impact and getting implementation right.
As a follow-up to our Reopening America's Schools Summit in May, each month this year, we will keep the conversation going with amazing thought leaders, practitioners, and researchers to support your reopening schools efforts.
In addition, we have launched Learn with Impact, our virtual learning hub. So go to www.impactlearninglead.com and sign up for our new course, Move from Knowing to Doing. Implementation teams, don't start change without one. The course opens August 11th and sales close August 27th. Come learn with us.
This month, we are fortunate to have Doug Fisher and Bryan Dale join us in Conversations with Impact. They will talk with us about the new Distance Learning Playbook written by Doug Fisher, Nancy Fry, and John Hattie.
The entire Impact team is loving the accessibility and relevance of the book for reopening schools from a distance with a focus on high-quality teaching. It is hot off the presses, and we highly recommend purchasing it.
We are Impact Learning and Leading Group, and it's time to talk about moving from hoping it happens to making it happen. Together we're better. Let's get started. We are so excited today to launch our very first Conversations with Impact. Hi, everyone. I'm Janice Pizzuto.
And I'm Stephen Carney.
And we would like to welcome Doug Fisher.
Hi.
And Bryan Dale.
Hello.
Doug Fisher is a teacher leader at Health Sciences High in San Diego, California, and a professor at San Diego State University. And he, as Impact Learning and Leading Group, is interested in high-quality learning experiences for all learners.
And Bryan is an English teacher at the same school in San Diego, and he has also served as a special educator.
We are so excited about this book, and your timing could not have been better, right? Because the perfect timing is so good. So many schools are really working through different scenarios to try to reopen and not wanting to return to what some refer to as pandemic teaching, but to really use evidence-based practices and get back to what we know is really good, strong pedagogical teaching to impact kids.
Yeah, and I don't know how Doug and others, you guys came out with this book so quick. It was the timings was perfect. If you're not familiar with this new book, it's called Distance Learning Playbook. It's the one that's, wait, I got to point correctly.
Right there.
Over there. The Distance Learning Playbook. Get it. Apparently, it hit like the #1 selling list before it was even on the bookshelf. And just super powerful. And we really liked a lot of the things that were in the book, and there's some really powerful things that resonated with us. One was this, in the book, they create this opportunity for reflecting on utilizing the practices and creating notes to yourself, which I thought was a powerful professional learning model.
Right. Another one is so powerful. And Stephen and I was like, okay, stop doing it. We were watching videos. So there's actually videos of teachers implementing the practices. So one of those things that we know is best is sometimes you can describe it to me. I need to see it. And there's a little QR code and you can go right to it and you can pop the video and see what does this really look like in action. And one of the things that Stephen and I did, and I would imagine teachers and other people would do, is then we started talking about it, right? Having a conversation about the teaching moves that were happening and things that, well, would that be a struggle for me? And then he's like, well, that would be easy for me. He's like, then we could help each other. So it created this collaboration talking point.
Yeah. And close to our heart, a couple things that really we loved was the fact that this was focused on evidence-based strategies.
Absolutely.
That there's good evidence behind the strategies here, that they're correlated with an effect size, and all of those effect sizes are associated with accelerated learning. And here at Impact, we are all about quality implementation around evidence-based practices. And so our final piece, Janice, you can share our final piece that we got really excited about this book.
Well, when we turned the page, guys, and saw that there was an implementation red, yellow, and green light, I almost came out of our chairs, because one of the things that's quite often missed in a lot of pedagogical work or books is the implementation component, right? So we read about it, we think about it, or we do a one-shot PD, or I listen to a webinar now, and we forget that it takes time to actually practice to build competence, to build confidence, to be able to then deploy the strategy. Research shows actually it can take up to 20 times of trying a new strategy to begin to develop beginning proficiency.
Yeah.
So when we saw that you're giving people permission to reflect and rate themselves, and then also think about how do I move forward with implementing this, we were all in.
So did we like this book or what?
I know.
Seems like you might like it.
That's right. So really,
Yeah.
in short, we actually love this resource,
We do.
Doug, and super excited to start talking to you about this resource. So why don't we get started, and why don't you tell us about how this project, this book got started, and why you felt was so critical to our profession at this time?
Yeah, so I've been in teaching and learning for many, many years, but something people don't really know about my professional life is I started off in speech pathology, speech therapy, and then got super interested in public health and wanted to be a health educator. And so I went back to school and got a master's degree in public health with an emphasis in epidemiology and biostatistics.
Oh,
Yeah, so
right.
people don't really know that.
Okay, Dr. Fauci, here we go.
There's a prize at the end if you can state the little known fact.
Right. So, so I was started off doing health, teaching health. There just aren't a lot of jobs for that.
Yeah.
And when you're a health teacher, you end up with all the kids. There's no tracking. Everybody has to take them. And so I ended up going back to school feeling like I'm not very good at this because there's a whole bunch of kids I can't reach. Because I was taught, here's the textbook, here's the assignment. So I ended up going back to school, and I got really interested in the role that literacy plays as a gatekeeper for students. But my degree was in public health, and after the first 2 years, I never used it again. But I do have a background in epidemiology, and I think right now epidemiologists are the rock stars right now.
They are. So
They are.
That's
And
right.
so we closed schools in San Diego on March 13th. And on March 17th, I said to Nancy, this is not going away. This idea that we're going to be closed for 3 weeks and go back, there's no way. I mean, this is not like a little SARS or, like whatever. This is big. And so I said, we better start figuring this out now. And it was really for our school. And so I contacted 74 teachers, Australia, Hawaii, Alaska, California, Texas. And I asked if we could and Bryan's one of them, can we pop in? Can you record? Can we coach? Can we think? We know what the evidence says. How do we translate it into the distance space? And John Hattie, as partner on this, he brought the whole knowledge base. And as you know, distance learning has a very low effect size, 0.17, very low. So people worry that distance learning doesn't work. But if we unpack that in studies comparing physical school from distance learning, there's no difference. The setting is not the determiner. It's what the teacher does that makes the difference. And
by the way, Doug, I'm really glad you guys mentioned that in the book as well, because I think that really set the stage that it wasn't that it's bad.
No.
It's that it's how it's used.
Right.
What you do with that.
Not like we should all just throw everything out when the schools go back and only do distance learning.
Right.
It's not the factor that determines whether kids learn or not. It's what the teachers do.
That's right.
So honestly, when we started March 20th, after spring break, when we came back, some of the distance learning wasn't very good. And it was a lot of independent, here's a random collection. And in our defense, we were pandemic teaching, quarantine teaching, whatever you want to call it. We were not distance learning.
Right.
And I think we should stop saying distance learning for March, April, and into May. But this group of 74 people started really learning about what it takes to implement the evidence base. And we ended up noticing things like, hey, there's an instructional framework. Hey, teacher clarity, for which there's a huge research base, is really important in distance learning. So that's how this came to be.
Cool. Wow. Well, great. Well, the other question, and I think before we jump into the big questions we have is, so you've got this now, I think, really incredible concept. You have some evidence that you're looking at as this group of 74 about the power of what you're doing, but then you turn this thing around in no time flat. So if this is March, what did you say, the 17th that you start looking at this, and now this comes out in July? So talk about that a little bit briefly about that turnaround, and how did you get that turnaround so quickly? Because that's kind of unprecedented as well.
Yeah. That's our partner, Corwin. Corwin said, you know, if we delay this, teachers won't have evidence-based information to make a decision. Should school go back distance in the fall? So Corwin took a risk with us because, you know, if this wasn't that big of a deal, or if there was rapidly a cure, they would have produced a book that a few people would be interested in. And they took a risk and they said, okay, if this is still a crisis in August and September, we want to be there for teachers and provide them with some confidence. And I think that's my main message is I deeply wish we could go back to school. I want to physically go back to school. The moment it is safe, we will go back to school. But in the meantime, we have to do the best we can for kids. And we actually know some stuff, and we can get them to learn. And so I want to make sure people know, we didn't forget how to teach. Let's have some confidence. Let's have some joy. Let's innovate. Let's experiment. So I'll say, you know, for Bryan, Bryan's really good at teacher modeling. He has an ability to open up his brain and explain things to kids and apprentice them into way more cognitive thinking than they would do on their own. He didn't forget how to do that when he went home to teach from his house.
Right.
So that was one of the first thing I noticed about Bryan is one of the access points he provided students were modeling, because he knew how to do that. Yeah. So that builds his confidence, right? So I don't know, Bryan, you want to say something about teacher modeling? I remember you were teaching the Odyssey when school closed, and you just flipped it, and all of a sudden there you are modeling on the Odyssey like you didn't speak.
I just knew I needed to open up my brain for the kids in order to see how to approach texts that were difficult. And during that time we were reading the Odyssey, and you know, it was definitely a different sense, you know, or a different feeling ultimately once I got in front of a computer and I had to record myself and edit down my recordings and all of that. But you know, when you take a few steps back, you realize it's not that different than what you're doing in the classroom. It's just a different format in which you're delivering the information to the kids. And so it took a little creativity and, you know, some other brains to talk to and to discuss some different ways. But ultimately, you know, you invite someone in just to kind of see what you're thinking, and, you know, that lends to their growth ultimately.
Well, that's I think, an incredibly powerful statement that it really, I think you said that's not really that different. And that just took some creativity. Maybe say that one more time, Bryan, because I think that's going to be important for our listeners to really understand, that is the ability to kind of take what we already know and just transfer that over. And that's what you were talking about here. And that's what you mean by it really wasn't that different, if I'm correct.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, teaching and education is an art and a skill that you end up practicing over and over again. And though the terrain is a little bit different, it's kind of like riding a bike. Ultimately, you learn how to ride a bike, you can do it almost anywhere, but you might have to practice and explore different avenues. And I took that approach to teaching, and I think a lot of other educators did too. And ultimately, they can transfer these skills that we have in the classroom and bring it to an online format, or whatever format that might be for us in the future.
That's awesome. It's also a great message of hope too. I think if we can get that message out to our colleagues to know that they can do this, and they do have the tools, the skills, and the resources. It's just thinking about how that applies in this format. So thank you. Well, as you know, Janice and I, we are Impact Learning Leader Group, and we focus on effective implementation of evidence-based practices. And we actually came up with a couple questions that we want to ask you. They come from we actually designed them around our framework, which is IMPACT, Impact, which really is through the lens of identify, leadership, professional learning, assessing and adjusting, collective efficacy, and teaming. So our questions are really around those topic areas. And so Janice, you want to launch us into our first big question here?
Yeah, I will. And I just want to, but I want to kind of emphasize a couple things I heard from both of you that were just really resonated with me. Doug, you said the setting is not the determiner.
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think we could state that, right? 20 times for 80% retention, right? Sometimes, right? I always remember that stat because if we can get stalled and frozen. And I think one of the things that we really resonated with the work that you guys do and Steve and I do is it's hard work, but it's the hard work, right? And so we would advocate that we remember the human element and welcome kids joyfully and with love as our first mantra, right? If we were but within that, right, then we can start to think about what are those strategies that we know are really going to have an impact, and might we need to tweak them. And that's what, Bryan, you were talking about, how you modeled for the students, and you actually had to collaborate. You talked with someone kind of after you did it. So I guess we would advocate in that collective advocacy piece on our part.
Yep.
So in the first part of the framework, we ask people to identify. It's like, what is it we really want to identify to implement effectively? So within the playbook, we looked through it and we love it, but it's like, where would I get started? Right. So if I'm a practitioner or a teacher, I want to identify what might be the highest leverage place for me to get going.
Mm-hmm. And I think there are several places that you could start. And it's a playbook for a reason. It's not a book where you have to read cover to cover. So if teacher clarity is an area that you want to explore more on, there's a module on teacher clarity. Clarity is important in both distance and physical environments. If there's not clarity, kids are not probably learning a lot. As we think about the start of this year, we probably need to be thinking about the first days of school and student-teacher relationships. So you might start there. Soon, you're going to have to figure out how to design the learning experiences for students. So some people are going to have an A-B schedule. Some people are going to have a morning, afternoon. Some people are only going to have distance learning. So you have to figure out with what you have, what's the instructional framework you can use. Eventually, you're going to have to give kids feedback and grades. So that's how they're organized, is like, how do we think about that? If there's any luck to this, we close schools on March 13th. Bryan and all the other teachers already had healthy growth producing relationships with students.
Yeah.
My stressor has been, when we go back to school from a distance, how do we do that? How do we establish relationships from a distance? So I've been talking about this, I've been thinking about this, and someone sent me a direct message on Twitter and said to stop saying that. And I wrote back and said, why? And she said, I met my husband of 20 years online. Relationships can develop in a distance format. And I'm like, right, I thought about this.
It's so true.
That's what we're looking for. But yes, why am I so obsessed with this? Human beings, we are social animals. Yeah. We want to connect with other people. So there are tools to develop healthy growth producing student and teacher relationships. So they're in the playbook. I don't have to worry about that so much. I just need to use the tools and establish my credibility, the trust I have with students, the relationships, the honesty that I have, the predictability that I have. All that's important. I didn't forget how to do that. I just have to figure out how to do it now in this venue.
Yeah, good.
Yeah. Bryan, how would you identify, like if you were to recommend and dive in, okay, here's one place where you could identify, what you want to scale effectively to build that confidence that leads to confidence?
Well, I definitely would start with, my team of fellow educators, and just creating a safe space. This is, a new venue for us all, and making sure that I have people that I can count on and talk about whatever failures I might have come across, or celebrating of my successes is extremely important for me. And then the other aspect is that whole relationship building component. I know that I will have, ninth graders coming in that have never, been in high school before or anything like that. And it's going to be a difficult transition for them coming from, middle school into now potentially a distance-based learning environment. And so with that group of teachers and educators and our conversations leading around how to build relationships, it's all about trial and error. I was looking online and seeing people send postcards to students. One of our teachers were making little emoji versions of ourselves to send out and give to kids on our emails whenever they do, and inviting them to create their own. And so it's a lot of trial and error, and just having that mindset that, you know, you might as well throw a lot of things at it, and some things might not work and be successful, but there's going to be a lot there for us to do.
I heard you mention something that's so important, and it's a big piece of our framework, but one of the first things you said is, I'm going to go to my team.
Yeah.
And my heart just like swelled. So it's like, I love that, because together together we're better. And actually right now we need our team more than ever.
Yeah. Education is a communal experience, and it's worth that support group. It's worth striving for that support group.
Yeah.
Great.
Awesome.
Can I comment on the teamwork? We tracked some districts in California who, well-meaning, canceled the professional learning community times or team times because they didn't want teachers to feel overwhelmed. They were already not used to teaching online and that kind of stuff. They canceled them. Other districts maintained them. And what we noticed is, if you maintain your professional learning community, your grade level teams, your departments, whatever it was, the teacher stress level was lower.
Yeah.
On average, than when we took away a natural resource that teachers have, which is each other.
Yes,
and I think it was super well-meaning to say, you know what, there's enough on your plate. You were not going to have a 2-hour or whatever team meeting. And it turned out to be, in retrospect, the wrong decision.
That really resonates, because not only are you taking away that formal time, but we've already lost that informal time where we see each other in the hallway and I greet you as you come in. So it's almost, you know, it's more, we're human beings. So that critical component of those interactions.
Well, we have to have that opportunity to be able to also explore our thinking, explore what's working, what's not working, dialogue with our colleagues to really unpack our struggles and our successes, and you know, to make that work. It's a great leeway actually into our next question, which is, we are big advocates that the leader's role, and that could be the instructional leader, it could be the coach, it could be the principal, it could be the dean of student, whatever it means, is that part of their role is creating structures and processes for teams of educators to actually make meaning of the work. And that doesn't mean just in a formal professional learning workshop format. We're talking about where they actually get to dialogue and dig deep into making meaning of their practice. They get to unpack that particular strategy and dialogue about what's working, what's not working. What are some recommendations, and I think you were starting to go there a little bit there, Doug, what are some recommendations that either one of you have around how leaders can actually utilize this resource with their teacher teams to actually start to make meaning of their practice?
Thanks. I think teams need a goal or a common challenge, if you will. We're goal driven as well. Like if you give, and I don't think leaders should impose goals. And as you said earlier, you know, which module, Brian, do you think would be good for you to start with your team? That's going to be important. And then to maintain teacher agency, the belief that our efforts result in good things, we need to collect a little data on the impact that we have and not wait till next year, you know, whatever testing is going to look like in the spring and whatever. We need short-term wins. We need to be able to say X number of kids showed up, and at the exit poll on your Zoom meeting, they did a poll and they loved today's session. Good on that. So setting goals, collecting evidence, refining those, monitoring them. I think that's how we can help in this process, that we trust the teams, that we bring them together, we have them set goals, we have help them collect data or evidence, and we help them realize the impact they are having, because then we will maintain this sense of agency. And when teachers lose their agency, they quit this job. Yeah. If they don't believe that their efforts are resulting in anything, they're gone.
Yeah. I can really see the implementation red, yellow, and green that you have on the end of each chapter really being a powerful tool for that reflective piece as well, and that dialogue that could take place. And then the notes piece that allows them to self-reflect on their practice. And how powerful would that be to actually be a little bit transparent with our team members of, here's what I wrote down, or here's how I'm feeling about where I'm at in implementation. And then to be able, as you mentioned, to collect that data and really see that progress. Yeah. Bryan,
Imagine the relationship.
Say that again.
Yeah, one more thing, and Bryan, I'm in connection to Bryan. Sorry. Imagine the relational trust if you went to one of those modules and you used the traffic light scale and you said, I'm not good at this, and it's really important, because that scale has two parts. What's the, where are you at in it, and how important it is to you. So if you're not good at it and it's not important to you, don't waste time.
Right.
But if there's something that you don't feel good at yet and it's super important for you, for example, setting norms in an online environment, if that's important for you and you don't feel comfortable with it, go find your team.
Yeah.
That's the thing. So as Bryan was saying, when it's prioritizing the needs and the value, right? We need this and we value it.
Yeah. Then you'll do something. Go ahead, Bryan.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, I like everything that everyone's saying, and Doug, you say it so well too. So I'm afraid of like my version of it's going to not be as nice sounding, but it's that safe space, because the reflection piece in education is something that they champion through your student teaching process and all through your work. And, as you become more and more professional, it becomes a little bit more personal for you, but you create that safe space with these teacher leaders, and you're able to reflect on what you have. And I love that tool, the stoplight tool, because you're able to say, hey, I'm not doing too hot here on this topic right now, and I'm identifying it. So I know my kids are identifying it, and I need you to come in and listen and look for some things that I could possibly grow on. And it all kind of just touches back to the relationships that you have with your team and your leaders, and being able to share that experience with them, which I think is important. And that's kind of what would be my recommendation for any leaders at a school site.
Well, and it's a lot easier too to actually get into the virtual classroom as well, or the distance learning classroom. I can just log in.
They could
pop
pop
into.
into.
I can just log in and watch and participate.
And even if you're uncomfortable with that, there's the ability to like film yourself within these tools. Zoom, I can film a segment of my class that I'm concerned about, and then bring that to the team to discuss later on. And that is, it's a powerful tool. So it's pretty neat, despite the fact that this is, a totally new realm for people. It's a tool. The tools that we have available to ourselves is pretty cool.
Yeah, and really a unique opportunity like that we really haven't had before in education either, to really have those tools readily available. I think they've always been there for a while. We just haven't thought about how to use them like we're using them now, and to be able to think right off the get-go, all I need to do is push the record button now, and I can start recording. I can record this lesson and have something to reflect back upon.
And
brilliant.
I think ultimately you're capturing a more authentic experience in the classroom. When you bring a camera into a physical location, kids are going to act completely different, but you hit record and it's just a little light in the corner. Odds are everyone's going to be kind of who they naturally are, rather than putting on a front.
Yeah, so true.
Right. It goes right into the next piece that we have in our impact framework, because we start with identify meaningful leadership, but the power really lies in professional learning, right? And what we're actually circling around is like, oh, they're talking about professional learning. And our team at Impact, we really advocate for ongoing and embedded adult learning to impact student outcomes. So we think about that. And with this, the Distance Learning Playbook, what are some pieces that you think could fit into, if you were to say, here's an idea of how I would use it. And maybe Bryan, you've used it in that way, where you've embedded it into your professional learning, because what I heard you describing kind of. So could you tell us a little bit how you use the Distance Learning Playbook in your professional learning communities or with your teams?
Well, ultimately, as this, let me use like the modeling for an example. I wasn't the best modeler to begin with. It's a learned skill over time, and something that I will continue to practice, throughout my profession forever, ultimately, because I want to just be the best that I could possibly be for whatever group of students that I have. And in order to work on it, we use things like micro teaching. Before, when it was, we're brick and mortar and in a classroom, I would set up my cell phone in a corner of the classroom on a little, on some books ultimately, and capture a segment of my day in order to bring that to the team and discuss like, hey, today I tried to teach such and such, and it didn't make much sense to me or my kids in the classroom. And ultimately, when we transitioned into, you know, distance learning, I would try to capture the same thing. And I'm fortunate to have someone else who teaches the same exact content as me. So I'm able to bounce it off with her. And I'm also able to check in with other grade levels to discuss, and people who have been in the profession longer than I, to discuss like, what does success look like for them, and how do I translate that to my own profession, and how do I make it work for my own classroom? It's something that I've taken from the distance playbook. And ultimately, you know, if you're able to reflect and identify where your areas of growth, then that's kind of the most important piece, I think.
Mm-hmm. That's great.
That's really one of my criticisms of a lot of professional learning community models. They focus only on, did the kids learn it? And what I appreciate about your framework is the adults have to learn things too. Yes, when adults learn, kids learn more. We know that.
Right.
But I think the almost prohibition against adult learning in some PLC models is really problematic. And what we see is, here's the PLC, and then professional learning is over here, more like an event. Right. And that it just doesn't make sense to me. So professional learning is embedded into the entire conversations that Bryan's having with his colleagues. And yes, they're looking at student work, and yes, they're looking at standards. But if they could do it already by themselves, they would already be doing it. And so the whole idea is that team should be the learning community. That's why the L is in it. And it's not just kids learning, it's our learning too.
Well, the first two letters are professional learning.
Yeah. Quite often the adult learning piece gets lost. And one of the things that, you know, we would recommend, I know Steve and I have worked with hundreds of schools and, you know, districts across, just do what we'd call short shots of learning, right? You can take a short article, like, and maybe there's a section of the book or a strategy that you're interested in, and we're all going to read it, and then we're going to have a conversation. That's good learning time, right? It's adult, and then we can, you know, you can use a short protocol to talk about it. And, you know, talk about, as you mentioned, the successes and the failures, because then and then Doug, earlier you talked about teacher agency. That's how I grow my teacher agency. And I feel safe, and I feel like I can practice something and share my failure, as Bryan talked about, and then celebrate my successes, because I'm creating this opportunity to engage as how am I going to, what you talked about, Doug, is, am I reaching my goal? Am I not? And if I'm not, how am I going to get there? Right. So it becomes a safe place rather than a evaluation. So one of the things when we're talking about professional learning, those are those components that are really critical. And I think that you can use the tools that you have in there around reflection and the green light, red light, yellow light kind of help. I was thinking, if you, I don't know, did you intentionally think about the professional learning piece when you're putting that in, or?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's like, yes, that's not by accident.
The other thing, Janice, just to add to what you're saying, though, is that, you know, it's professional learning community is also about a mindset. I can choose to go to that meeting and see it as just another meeting, or I can see it as a place for me to learn and grow as a professional, which is called also professional learning community. There's a double meaning there too. And so it's me as the professional, not just the fact that it's a place for, learning. It's a place for me to actually function, behave as a professional. And Janice and I actually have a practice at the end of every one of our meetings. We end our meetings with, hey, Janice, what did you get from this meeting today? How are you leaving this meeting differently than you enter that meeting? What do you know?
Every day.
What do you know differently? You know, and we'll be like, all right, we're going to ask the question. Yes, because it's critical. If we're gonna talk about the importance of PLCs, we need to model our own mindsets and our own practice, our own work as support providers. So, on that topic, let's just jump into the assess piece a little bit, and let's go a little bit deeper, I think, into that green light and the assessing piece. As you think about the traffic light diagram there, or the traffic light model, I can see teachers using that as a way to assess their implementation. Any other thoughts that you have about ways that the educators can actually assess their implementation? And then what would you ask teams to look for as they assess the implementation of the effectiveness of some of those practices as well? So maybe take that a little bit deeper for us about the implementation and how to assess my own or assess the implementation of our team.
Well, ultimately, did the kids learn what they were supposed to learn? I mean,
You
that's
make it
the
so
ultimate,
simple,
right?
Doug.
So,
That's simple.
so, and teams bring data together to say, did the kids learn it? And if not, what are we going to do about it, right? So that's the ultimate. But I don't think we can only go to that. There are proximal and distal measures of this, right? So there are more proximal things like, how did I feel the lesson went? What part of the lesson did I really feel like we were right on fire right then? And as Bryan was saying, I think the micro teaching, which now is so natural because we're recording so much, I think the micro teaching is a great way to see change. You know, so let's say Bryan wasn't a good modeler, which is not true, but if he's learning it, he can watch it, he can invite another person to watch, and we can look at how does the modeling change? And we can look at it against like, okay, so the research says there are some factors in teacher modeling that work. Are they working for your students? Are you implementing them? So, I mean, there are more distal ways and then, you know, proximal and distal ways to think about like, what's really working in there. So I don't want to discount the teacher's sense of satisfaction, the teacher's belief that these actions are working, that I think one of the signs that you're really learning is your willingness to share with other people.
Yeah.
And I see that in a learning community, like, oh my gosh, they show up with stuff and they can't wait to share.
Yeah.
They are learning and they are a learning community.
Well said.
That's bravo.
Yeah, well said, and so true to our profession, and what a great way to model for their students as well. There's nothing I love more than a teacher being very vulnerable and candid with their own students and say, hey, here's a new strategy I just tried. Did it work for you even? You know, how did it work? And getting that feedback can be really powerful. That's how I also know that we have a learner in the midst as well, is because they really want that honest feedback, not only from maybe their peers or colleagues, but actually the students who are impacted by that strategy.
Yeah, and Stephen, I would even echo that for leadership, right? Some of my very most best mentors and leaders were ones that stood up in front of us, an entire staff or the entire district, say, well, hey, this didn't work out, but here's what we're going to do, and here's what I learned. Right. Yeah. So we're there. Don't just talk about being in a, some people say we're a continuous cycle of improvement, but are you? Right. Because we check that box, but then when we, you know, we create, sometimes there's these situations or environments where fear is just pervasive, right? So fear of failure or examining your failure or discussing and when a leader or a teacher can feel safe to say, this was hard for me. And here's why, and can we improve and do better? And then we become a learning organization.
And there's no greater time right now that I think a lot of people are afraid of their practice. And again, thank you again for this resource. I think to actually help alleviate the fear as well, because we don't want people going into the fall afraid of how they're going to do their work, and then allow that fear to actually take control. Yeah. So this is a great tool that I think will actually help overcome some of the fear. People can look at that and go, I know how to do this. I did this well in my classroom. I just have to transfer that over and then really take a look at my implementation of those. And am I getting the results that I want to get as a result of my practice? Janice, we have a couple more questions, and then I think we're close to out of time. So you want to move us on to the next one? This one I know is close to Doug, because I think he did a whole session on this topic at our summit. So I assume Doug's going to say something about it. He might just transfer this right over to Bryan. We'll see.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like, so I think this isn't a new word for anyone in the room. And I think as educators are listening and tuning in, whether it's visually or on our podcast, it's like, but we're talking about collective efficacy, right? And how do we build collective efficacy? And, you know, how do you see the distance learning playbook supporting and enhancing the collective efficacy that we really need to see to spread good practice in our schools and with our students?
Yeah, thanks. So there, you know, we all know the research, Bandora's research on collective efficacy, you know, mastery experiences and vicarious experiences are super important. And so we need to think about that. So what would a mastery experience look like for a team, not an individual? And what would vicarious experiences look like for a team, not just an individual? Yes, we can build our individual efficacy. And I think that's where the focus was in March and April and May, was individual efficacy. Now it's time to transfer that into collective.
Yeah.
And I think that's what Bryan's team is able to do, is to really say, here's how we are processing, here's how we are. And I think we need new models of how to build collective efficacy, not just what it is. So Bandura's definitions are solid, right? But I think teams go through a process. They set a goal, they intentionally learn things. They need some time for safe practice where no one's like watching or evaluating.
Right.
Then they open up that practice and then they collect evidence of their impact. As John Hattie would say if he were here, it's not just raw teaching. It is evidence that feeds the collective. And it does not have to be student outcome data. It could be.
Right.
But imagine Bryan's team coming together and saying, we created this learning management system and the students are telling us this. So at our school, we all have a poster that says what we're working on and we want feedback on it. Every one of us says, okay, when it's published to our peers, to our students. So as a teacher, I'm working on this. I would love your feedback. And we kind of shut that down in distance learning. And we need to bring it back in the fall so that we can build that collective. And so that's one of my reflections. We maintained PLCs and team meetings at our school, but we really didn't do the seeking out of feedback from our collective group. And so as I think about like the English team that Bryan's on, we have to be more intentional. Like, here's what I'm trying to accomplish. Here's what we are trying to accomplish.
Right.
And that's where I'm thinking about this in the really of rebuilding the collective.
Like
Go
with that, Bryan.
Well, I like that, and then I'm realizing that, yeah, you know what, you can translate this easily over into distance-based learning. I was going to say, you know, it's important to hear your own voice in the team's decisions, and I think that part of it comes with creating that safe space for the teams to discuss what is important for us right now. And, you know, the easy knee-jerk reaction is, you know, what is distance learning, and that kind of being where most people go to. But having those conversations now that we've had some experience with it and saying like, hey, I noticed that this is something that's going wrong with us as a collective. I know this is we might need to work on in the lower division English or whatever content area that you're working with, and providing that platform for teachers to explore, to try out different things, to bring that back to the group and say, hey, this is, you know, what's working, what's not working, is an important process. And I like the fact that it's not always just, you know, student data driven. It can be just the way that our LMS is set up, the way that we deliver the information, disseminate information to students is important for us to look at and discuss, especially as we change the platforms in which we're teaching from.
Yeah. So everyone, if you heard both Doug and Bryan, they said very loud and clear, don't let these teams disappear. Don't let them go away. Don't let your PLC teams die because you're afraid of, you know, make sure that they are there, they're alive, and they're well, and they have the tools and resources they need to be able to have the kinds of dialogue that Bryan and Doug are promoting here, because we need to bring that back if we're to really do well in the midst of this pandemic we're in.
It's critical.
And I think, Janice, I think that they answered the next question, which is really around teams as well. So bravo to you two. So if I think we should leave with our final big question. And the final big question, drum roll. No, it's not that big of a deal. But
okay,
it's fun for us. Go ahead, Janice.
It's just fun. Right, this is our question. Everybody's answering, but you're the first ones. Is there anything you wish would come back in style?
Come back in style?
Any trends, fashions you wish would come back in style from the past?
Completely off topic. We just want to get this answer.
Yeah. Shoulder pads, inline roller skates.
I want that first wave music to come back.
Yes. Agreed.
The first wave of alternative music. I miss that. I have a radio station, a satellite radio, so I can hear it. But I would love to see that come back. I'm not sure I want any of the fashion back, though. I flashed on like bell bottoms and things, and women wearing leg warmers. That's not appealing. We don't want that.
Bryan.
Oh,
I'm in
this
agreement.
is a hard one. I'm thinking about the floppy hats. I used to be a big wearer of those, or cargo pants.
Oh yeah.
That way I can carry like my Game Boy to school.
That's good. All right. Well, we're going to keep asking that question of all of our guests, and we're going to compile a list of all the trends that come back that need to come back, and we'll hopefully have something and see if we can start our own trend and see if something can come back. Well,
we're so excited to have you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. We're excited about this book, the Distance Learning Playbook. Please check it out. It's an incredible resource, especially in the time that we're in right now. To both of you, we want to extend our gratitude. Thank you for serving students first. Thank you for serving teachers and staff and your colleagues. And thank you for your empathy and your open hearts. And we couldn't be more thankful for the time that you gave us today just to engage in this dialogue around this incredible resource that you've got called Distance Learning Playbook. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, guys.
And thank you. And thanks for the invitation. And thanks for all you're doing to get good information out to lots of people.
We're doing our best.
That's right. Doing our best. That's right. We're learning as well. This is a whole new venue for us, and you know, we went from you know, being on the grounds and in schools and standing next to you know, our teachers and our leaders, and we had to find another way to provide support, and that mattered. And so we're hoping that this matters.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. Thanks for your time. Have a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to our show today.
We hope you learned as much as we did today. We are so grateful to Doug and Bryan for their time and advice as we implement evidence-based practices in this new distance learning environment.
Remember to check out Learn with Impact Virtual Learning Hub at www.impactlearnandlead.com.
And sign up for our new course, Move from Knowing to Doing, Implementation Teams. Don't start change without one. And this course opens August 11th and sales close August 27th. Come learn with us.
You can always contact us for coaching, consultation, or for implementation resources.
And don't forget to like our Facebook page, find us on YouTube, and follow us on Twitter.
This has been a production of Impact Learning and Leading Group.
If you enjoyed the show today, please tag a friend and share it.